episode 184 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans Weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and today we're here for a second episode all about Ys, the Oath in Felghana. The three of us have finished, and we have some thoughts, mostly that Chester's a dick, but we will elaborate that on it very soon. So, Hilary, Chester, dick or not a dick?
I'm gonna have to say he's still a dick.
Okay, and Tina, is Chester a dick or not a dick?
Yeah, he's still a dick.
Alright, glad that we cleared that up. Now, we left off in the previous episode, basically talking up until the Elder Mountains ice cavern part of Oath in Felghana, but before, and I do want to sort of go through the rest of the story linearly, because I think because there are a lot of big plot points happen in the second half of the game. But first I wanted just a couple overall impressions, and especially since this was the first complete Ys playthrough of any game in the series for either of you. Starting with you, Tina, did you overall have a positive or negative feeling about Oath in Felghana, especially the second half and ending of the game?
Overall, I really liked it, but I think I liked the first half better than the second half.
Okay.
I didn't really like some of the platforming sections in the second half.
Okay, yeah, that's all right. Yes, especially the clock tower. There's a little bit of platforming in sort of the whole game, but way more in the clock tower than any other portion.
Yeah.
We'll get to that when we get to the clock tower more specifically. But Hilary, same question. Overall feelings on Ys, the Oath in Felghana, especially regarding the second half.
Overall, I had a lot of fun with it. It was an enjoyable game, and I was always looking forward to playing it when I booted it up. Aside from the fact that there were some times that I definitely got stuck, either because of bosses or the platforming, and got frustrated. But, I would say it was in the realm of, I was frustrated for a short while, and then once I actually got through whatever it was, I felt accomplished, so that was nice.
Yeah, let's jump around a little bit about boss battles, because the boss battles were the obstacle that I had the first time I played this game. Again, I played this game for the first time around 6 years ago, I think, and this is my second playthrough, and I did both versions on normal, but every time I got stuck in the game, it was because of a boss battle. And I remember specifically, just trying to think back a little bit, the very first boss battle of the game, Dularn. Then the second of the two fire boss battles gave me trouble. I think, Hilary, you mentioned that you found the Fire Eater harder than the bird. I thought the bird was harder than the Fire Eater.
I don't know what it was, but by the time I was at the end of the lava area, I think I just had a slightly easier time, for whatever reason, memorizing the bird boss's patterns.
I don't know. I think it was because maybe the bird has easier patterns, but just deals a lot of big hit damage. I remember I would be doing okay, and then I would get wiped out in 2 hits. Yep. This is the first time I played this game. I had an easier time the second time around. And also that stupid horse in the dungeon where you can only damage its tail.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and just.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was a horse, or maybe even a rhino, but it looks like a sort of legged tank, but it has this stubby tail at the back, where it's the only place where it can take damage, and it also fires missiles and drops mines everywhere. And a
lot of them.
Yeah, I died once this playthrough, and way more than once when I first played the game. I had just the nightmare of it came rushing back when I encountered it when I beat the game a few days. When I fought it a few days ago. And that's in the space between the castle and the clock tower. The castle has 3 bosses in it. I thought it was by far the most elaborate dungeon, but we'll get to that in a bit. And then Chester, that agile mofo, his final boss battle was a bit of a challenge. And the final boss battle, who just loads the screen with fire and lasers and all kinds of stuff, these were all challenging stopgaps for me that I remember having to die and maybe level up some more and then figure out his pattern and then focus more on evasion than offense most of the time. Again, I think I mentioned this last episode, but it reminded me of like a shmup, like I'm playing Gradius or something. But at least they make Adol pretty agile. He moves quickly. You get a double jump. You get some fancy movement abilities. Mostly talking about wind magic here. I think the boss battles never seem unfair. They're always intense, but they're learnable and beatable. Even though I'm not great at action RPGs, but I was able to beat them all the first time around by hitting my head against them a little bit. Were any part of this game too difficult that you thought was maybe a deal breaker that almost made you quit?
For me, it was the platforming,
Yeah.
especially in the clock tower.
Yeah, this game
But,
is not great with platforming, especially since if you have to do something with a double jump and the wind, there's a bit of a delay before you get the wind. So you have to sort of cast the wind when you're in the middle of the jump instead of the top of your jump. That threw me off a couple times.
And I don't think it's unfair to say that the game punishes you a little bit if you miss some of those things, because you usually end up falling very far into a group of relatively strong enemies.
Or an area with a ton of spike pits or something.
Right.
Yeah, and you have to do the sort of Zelda balancing act thing a little bit with some walking over some very narrow corridors, with a risk of falling. A lot of just very careful double jumping. Ys it's never about the platforming, but these the three sort of solo action ones from the 2000s, 6 Napishtim, 3 Felghana, and Origin. All three of those have a little bit of it, and I don't know. I don't really love it in either of them, any of them.
How would you compare the platforming in this one to the other games? Like, was it more difficult, or?
I think it's a little bit easier in Origin. It has about the same amount of platforming, but that version of wind magic is a little bit easier to deal with. And one of the characters doesn't, instead of having a wind spell like Unica and Adol, he has a more like a levitate.
Okay.
And the third character has sort of a double jump and an air dash, making him sort of more agile than the other two. In E6, I don't remember E6 super well. I played it again 4 or 5 years ago after Felghana. I played the PS2 version, which I think is not quite as tight as the PC version, and also it's an older game, so the controls are a little clunkier. I remember the boss fights being about the same level of quality as Oath and Felghana, but the stage design wasn't as good. And there's a couple platforming parts, but I don't remember any of them being as difficult as the clock tower.
Yeah.
The thing that throws me off in that one is that Adol has 3 different swords, so the combos feel different depending on what sword you have equipped. And magic is more like a super move and less like a tool in that game. Yeah. So magic feels different. And Adol doesn't move quite as cleanly, but I know that there were improvements made to the PC version, or the Western release of the PC version. So it's possible that it's a little bit better than how I experienced it. And I should mention there's barely any platforming in the later ones. The East games with full party members, 7, Salsetta, and Lacrimosa of Dana. Barely any platforming. It probably doesn't even count. It's bigger, cooler dungeons and sort of party combat, but little in the way of puzzles or platforming. If anything, I sort of like the stage design in Oath and Felghana the most, because it's very vertical, especially with like the ice cave as you're going down and the clock tower as you're going up. There's a a cool verticality to stages, and they're not strictly flat and linear. I like that a lot. And that was also the case in Origin, because in East Origin you're basically going up a tower for the large majority of the game. And I like how like saying that there are puzzles is a little bit misleading, but there's a good number of different directions and hidden areas and small puzzles, like collecting the items for the chapel area in Valstein Castle. The stage design is cool in Oath and Felghana, and also cool in Origin, but I think those two have better stage design than the rest of the series. So Hilary, do you have any thoughts on the dungeons and play areas of Oath and Felghana?
Oh, geez. Overall, I like the variety. I think I touched on this a little bit last time. But
it's a little bit like you're playing 8 Mega Man stages. Like, oh, here's the Iceman stage, and here's Fireman stage, and here's Mountain Man stage, even though that's not a Robot Master.
A little bit, but I don't know. I appreciate it because it's a nice contrast from some other RPGs where things are kind of gray, or I don't know, even stages that you see often in RPGs like the mines, it didn't feel generic, so that was nice. And that's probably a lot because of the verticality you were talking about.
We mentioned that the music is pretty good in this game in the previous episode, and I think that holds true, maybe even better through the end of the game, because Valstein Castle and the Clock Tower are my 2 favorite tracks of the whole game. I was they both really fire me up, but I think music sets a tone pretty well. Like there's a great feeling of forward momentum in like the mountain stage, and in the Ilburn's Ruins stage music, but the mines are like a horror movie. There's just this incredible feeling of dread in the music.
And mines were not my favorite spot.
And then the clock tower, like it goes in this weird dancey trancy bit with a lot more electronic sounds than the sort of, I don't know, more orchestra in the rest of the soundtrack. It's an eclectic soundtrack that doesn't always seem to fit together, but at least all the individual pieces are cool. I really like the soundtrack in Oath and Felghana. Tina, did you have a favorite song that you remember?
I remember, I think it was right after the town was attacked. There was this one song playing just for a little while that was a remake of one of the songs from the Super Nintendo game, from Wanderers.
Oh, nice, and yeah. A lot of the music in this game is remade from the Super Nintendo version, but
yeah, that was like one of my favorite songs from the original game, so I was so happy to hear that.
That's cool. Hilary, do you have a favorite track that you remember?
I am also a big fan of the clock tower music. I thought it gave a cool ambiance to an otherwise difficult stage. It kind of elevated it for me.
But I was a little bit surprised that it had like a bass drop and a snare going like just building up like that, like it's a little bit dance hall-y for a evil clock tower creating a dark ritual. But you can't win them all, I guess. But let's roll it back a little bit. Where we left off was at the ice cave, and where Adol gets the terror bracelet with topaz gems infused in it that lets him break through walls with a little dash attack. Then you fight a boss against a dragon with stone legs, and you can use the earth to hack at his legs and make him trip, and then attack his face after he's down. Not a very challenging boss fight compared to others in this game. But most importantly of all, you're trapped in the ice cave afterwards, and Dogi does his signature move. Crushes through a wall to save his best friend.
Yay!
You may or may not have known this, but Dogi does that in every single game in which he appears. He smashes through a wall to save Adol. It's again Dogi's not in every East game, but he's in more than half of them, and he always breaks through a wall, and that's why they call him Dogi the Wall Crusher. I enjoyed that very much. I never enjoyed it more than in East 7, where Dogi is a playable character. Not really a spoiler, since he joins you about 10 minutes into the game. A very special moment when you see Dogi smash through the wall, and I hope to God that happens in East 9 Monstrum Nox later this year in Japan, and maybe at an undetermined date worldwide. But shortly after that, you meet Chester again, and he stabs Dogi in the chest.
Oh my god!
Dogi surprised me a little bit by realizing that Chester's evil act was an act, exactly as I implied there, and Dogi takes this remarkably in stride, because Dogi is the most chill dude in the entire world. He goes, yeah, I figured you were faking it, but so why are you doing this, man? You're making Elena sad. And then
that was pretty great.
And after getting stabbed in the chest, he takes it in about as much stride as he can, going back to his master's place to heal up. I did remember this happening from the first time, but it doesn't make it any less of a shocking moment. What were your thoughts on Chester's first big turn? Because, he stabbed him in the chest.
Yeah, it's like, at first, it seemed like he was just pretending to be the bad guy or something when he was starting to talk about his real motivations, but then when he stabbed Dogi, I was like, okay, you're still a butthole.
Yeah, definitely still a dick. His dick status is not in question at this point. But instead of like revealing his motivations and revealing that he's still the older brother and friend that he always was, but he's too far deep in this crazy plan of his to shy away from doing things like stabbing his former best friend in the chest. And he even created a little pool of 2005 pixelated blood.
I know, and yet he's like, "Oh, I wounded him. I'm not going to kill him."
But you better to give him medical attention soon. So you better let me go, Adol. And Adol, being the good person to a fault that he is, immediately takes care of Dogi instead of going after Chester. Again, a bit of a turning point. At this point we realize that Chester is sort of that Chester has a deeper motivation for why he's doing everything that he's doing, and that Maguire is sort of the target now. So the dungeon after this is Veilstein Castle, which is probably my favorite dungeon in the game, not because of the frustrating parts, like the falling pits and the annoying maids that dash around and throw kitchen knives at you. Uh, it's a little bit of a dark implication. Oh yeah, everyone in the castle except for 6 or 7 people has been turned into a demon, and you're murdering like kitchen staff and soldiers here that were formerly fully human. A bit of a dark implication, but like parts of it, like there's a circular area near the end of the game that has you go in different paths, and one path has you reuse the Nightfire gem from the mine. One path that has you need to use the anti-lava item. One is a big ice sheet where you got to put the stone shoes on again. It's like it sort of recaps a lot of the different platforming elements and exploration elements that you had to use in earlier dungeons. And also it's just much more larger and labyrinthine than any other dungeon in the game. I accidentally found my way back to the entrance at one point and had to teleport back to a save point. It took me longer than any other dungeon, but it also felt more like a big epic dungeon than any other in this game. So I really like Felghana Castle, and it has my favorite song. So yeah, I'm a big fan. What were your thoughts on this dungeon in general? Starting with you, Hilary.
So they were pretty similar to yours. I got lost a few times. I really, really, really do love it when a game brings back some of those skills that you were supposed to have learned early on, because I just really hate it when you get an item or an ability and never use it again. So that
shout out to the spinner in Zelda the Twilight Princess.
Right? Yeah.
Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. You have that spinner for one dungeon, and then I don't think you ever use it again. Maybe for one piece of heart somewhere, but yeah, that's a weakness of Zelda that I will clown on the series for sometimes. Continue, please.
That's what I was thinking. Let's see. I have to admit, I started calling it the Dark Souls Castle, just because of that tone you were talking about with staff being turned into zombies and just kind of the look of it and all the hits. And I definitely had fun at some points, like kind of trapping enemies so that I could get to them more easily without, like, from a distance. So it was fun, but it took me a long time.
Right. So Tina, do you have any thoughts on Felghana Castle?
Yeah, it felt more like a final dungeon than the actual final dungeon.
Yeah, the final dungeon did one thing I thought it was cool. They had a lot of paths in the background and foreground, as you were that made it feel like a bigger space than it actually was. But in terms of the actual dungeon content, I basically agree. Felghana's a bigger, more epic dungeon than Genos Island.
Like, I did like how there was such a big mix of different areas and things to do. It's just those two little platforming sections, the clock tower, and then there was this one room with, like, tiny little platforms.
Yeah.
I didn't like those 2 areas.
That's before the first boss. There's three bosses here, plus a fourth one at the end of the clock tower. That weird sort of elemental ninja guy, then the fire dog, and then the horse tank that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yes.
I sort of liked the fire elemental dog a lot because it's maybe the only boss in the game that's smaller than Adol.
Yes.
And I like it. This is true of lots of different kinds of games, not just East, but I like it when an action game is equally comfortable giving you a giant boss bigger than you are that has a great sense of scale, but also a boss the same size of you that is just dangerous and mobile and feels like a duel rather than a boss fight. I think Devil May Cry does this amazingly. Like Dante ends up fighting his twin brother Virgil. I don't know, 7 or 8 times over the Devil May Cry series, and it feels different than when he's fighting a giant demon that takes up an entire room.
I was just going to say, shout out to Chester here, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chester is a perfect example of this. There's a couple boss fights like this in East Origin as well, but the dog, it's unusual, like, Adol fighting a boss that's smaller than he is. I dug that. I like that East can mess around with scale with its boss fights. But the elemental ninja at the beginning, I don't know what it's called. I called it a ninja just because it has, I don't know, it vaguely looks like a ninja wearing a cloak. But it changes colors and you have to hit it with with your different magics at appropriate times. It's kind of like the harpy bosses on the mountain, but a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, I'm really terrible because I didn't actually figure out that you could change your bracelet in the boss fights until like the very end of the game.
Yeah. I had to do that all the time. It's it's L and R on a controller, but I'm not sure what about a keyboard. Maybe I'm just used to playing the Super Nintendo
Yeah, I did use a
Mega Man
controller.
games.
I just didn't know about that.
Maybe that's why I like Oath and Felghana so much. I treat it like a Mega Man game, and I know I already like those. But if only Adol got a new weapon or new superpower for every boss that he defeated, then it would be perfect, of course. But so we have that elemental ninja, then that fire dog on a bridge. I don't like the 2D space bosses as much as the isometric area ones. Again, the bird in the fire dungeon and the dog. You fight them basically on a 2D bridge, which I think is a throwback to the Super Nintendo or the original PC Engine version of Wanderers from East, because basically every boss fight was like that on a 2D plane.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not a great... I don't think that game is very good, so I think that obviously the boss fights are better here, but I think that having those 2D plane boss battles are a bit of a throwback. Would you say that, Tina? I mean, you probably played more of that game than I did.
Yeah, I don't think I even got to the first boss in that game, though. I found it so hard.
I think I did get to the first boss, but I died. Is my very foggy memory of this. Again, and this is the early 2000s when I tried to play a copy of it. Now, Hilary alluded to it before. The fourth boss in the Clock Tower, Valstein Castle section of the game is Chester, 1-on-1. He's the same size as you. He has a lot of dash attacks, a little bit of invincibility. He's got his own fireballs. It's a really good boss fight. I like this fight a lot.
I do too. It's another one after this string of different types of boss fights. I think I had a little bit of trouble adjusting back to fighting him.
Now, here's the part of the podcast where I talk about other games in the East series a little bit, because this boss fight very specifically reminds me of the East versus Trails fighting game.
Nice.
Alternative Saga East versus Sora no Kiseki.
Is that released here at all?
No. I was able to import it. The menus are in English. The item names are not, so I had to use a translation online for that. But basically it's a fighting game in the, I'm pretty sure, in the East 7 engine. That it reminded me of Power Stone, because there's jumping, blocking, and dodging, and everyone has their own moveset similar to East 7 that you can program onto the 4 face buttons. But it's 6 characters from East 7, 6 characters from Sora no Kiseki, 3 villains, including Chester, and then one sort of secret character who's from a different one of the PSP Legend of Heroes games. But Chester in Alternative Saga is based on his moveset from this boss fight. So he does the sort of triple jab, a lot of different teleportations and like feints. He's a very agile, very evasive character in Alternative Saga, and he has a fireball and sort of a multi-fireball. This boss fight reminded me of that game because it was fresher in my mind. I played that fighting game in between my first run of Oath and Felghana and now, and it's I got it, at an import store, but it was cheap. It was only something like $15 American, and if I had imported it, it was actually cheaper on eBay, but then shipping was almost as much as the actual cost of the game. So I ended up just finding it at the import store near me. But it's a very fun fighting game that I have plugged in this podcast a little bit. So, but if you're East, if you're interested in more East that you can't get through, through an actual East game, that's one way to do it. But it plays a lot like East 7. So if you're comfortable with East 7, then you'll be comfortable with this. But that game is great. The story is completely stupid, and you should not pay attention to that. And just play it to unlock characters and see flashy super moves.
I think I have 7 for PSP, but I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, it was. It came out in PSP. It was localized by Xseed, just like this game. And it had a PC version for a long time that I think was only in China and Korea. It was just an Asian PC port. But then I think they brought that PC port over last year. So it's a very recent enhanced PC port if you want to play E7 that way.
I do see a PC one on Steam.
Yeah, on Steam. It probably came out in 2018, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I'd have to double check. But that game's really good. It's a party system and not like Oath and Felghana. You control 3 characters at once, and you switch between them rapidly. But the combos and the moves and the super moves feel very action RPG, very East-like.
Yeah.
And You can you can play as Dogi in that one, so it's automatically the best game in the series.
What's the
Yay.
timeline for 7? Because I'm looking at a picture of Dogi right now, and he looks a lot older.
Well, okay. The timeline for 7 is that it takes place only 2 or 3 years after this, but Dogi, his look changes a little bit. He looks younger in Memories of Celceta than in 7, which I think takes place before. But he just has a weird shaped face in 7.
Yeah.
They gave him a gigantic chin.
Yeah.
And then in Lacrimosa of Dana, they give him a narrower chin and some facial hair, but also like a silver streak in his hair. So it's like, is Dogi 10 years older than Adol? I don't know. It's hard to say. But he's always very broad and muscular. Like when in Oath and Felghana, it'll be when Dogi's about to say something off screen. It's like it says like in a manly voice or something.
Yeah.
They make it very clear that Dogi is a muscular dude. And also, speaking of Dogi, shout out to Burhart, his master, who's the mountain hermit in this game. After you've beaten the game, and I think it might only be on hard or nightmare mode, you can fight Burhart in a secret boss battle. He is the sort of challenging post-game boss, if you want to.
Yeah, I think I watched a little bit of a video of that, and the guy couldn't beat him either.
He does that massive axe throw ability that you see him using against some skeletons at the very end of the game. But
Yeah.
he's hard. I don't really always challenge hunt when I play these games. Like, I don't think I've ever even tried playing an East game on nightmare mode for more than 30 minutes. But yeah, it's a cool boss fight. But back to the Chester boss fight. After that happens, you realize that you learn that the true mastermind of all the evil that happened here, including Chester and Elena's tragic pasts, they were orphaned after the village on Genos Island was destroyed, and he blamed Count Maguire all these years. But really, it was Bishop Nicholas.
Yep.
And a little bit later, just at the beginning of Genos Island, Dularn, the evil sorcerer that's been tailing you the whole game, is the adorable Sister Nell, the nun that hero worships Bishop Nicholas. That is the big twist that I hinted at maybe a little bit too obviously in the first episode. The turn is that Nicholas is the villain. I don't think this was done this elaborately in the original version of the game. They just the second to last boss is just a guy named Garland, and Nicholas identifies himself as Nicholas Garland at the right before you fight him.
Ah.
But that's not even very important. What is important is that he's been leading everyone on, sort of manipulating Count Maguire and betraying the townspeople for at least a decade, depending on how old Chester and Elena were when they were orphaned. And he's been worshipping what he believes is a dark god named Galaban, which is the giant monster sealed under Genos Island. And but when you fight Galaban, he says a few things that I think make a little bit more sense if you've played East 6. Do you mind if I don't know, these don't really count as spoilers. Do you mind if I do a little bit of explaining behind Galaban?
Go for it.
Okay. Yep. All right, sure. There's this group called the Tribe of Darkness. They're bad people. They're villains or adjacent to villains in most of the East games from 6 onward. And in East 6, you go and you go to an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, or the East version of the Atlantic Ocean, and you discover that the Tribe of Darkness was a stronger civilization many centuries in the past, and they tried to destroy the world multiple times, but were stopped by by various heroes and forces, including a civilization called the Eldil or Eldine. I forget which it is. I think like it's one of them is the civilization name and one of them is a character name. But basically a civilization of winged people that fought the Tribe of Darkness. And in Ark of Napishtim, the title thing, the Ark of Napishtim, is like an ancient super weapon that was used in the conflict between the Eldil and the Tribe of Darkness. And Galaban, when you fight him, says eradicate the winged ones, and protect the Ark, something like that. So I don't think Galaban is a dark god or even a demon. It's a super weapon that was developed by the Tribe of Darkness to attack the Eldine, but then it was stopped by the hero Genos ages and ages ago, who might be an Eldine himself, an Eldil himself. I'm going to mix up those two words. I'm not sure which one's the proper one, and I don't feel like looking it up right now. Sorry. So Galaban's not a dark god. It has some connection to the Tribe of Darkness war from centuries ago in this storyline. and it alludes to it in some of the text before the boss fight. Okay.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm happy that you did explain that because I heard bits and pieces as I was going through, and I watched a few videos and stuff as I was playing as well, and they alluded to it. So it's good to get a full explanation of how it connects.
Falcom has done a pretty good job of having the connective lore tissue between the different East games. I'm trying to figure out if Eldil or Eldine. I think Eldine is the name of the civilization, and Eldil is an Eldine that you meet in one of the East games. But the conflict between the Eldil and the Tribe of Darkness, and humanity's role in all of this, and Adol's role in all of this, is a through line of the series that they've done a very good job of building over the years. But they're not like the only one, because you go into some weird creation, destruction, god, goddess mythology in both East 7 and East 8 that is sort of unconnected to the Tribe of Darkness, even though there are some Tribe of Darkness characters involved in those games. It's just basically just the world of East has a lot of ancient civilizations with secret powers that you always seem to be uncovering, and Adol always seems to be the chosen hero that ends the cycle of suffering. But East Oath and Felghana is a quote-unquote normal East game in that it's Adol and Dogi on an adventure, and that the Tribe of Darkness is involved somehow. Is a little bit not quite as crawling up its own mythology, but as other games in the series, because East's origin ties directly into all of the events in East 1 and 2. Arkham Napishtim started all the Eldil Tribe of Darkness story in a way that they really hit you over the head with some of that stuff. But Oath and Felghana is a more self-contained, slightly easier to digest East story that is still connected to the larger amount of East lore. But I think we've probably mentioned every single East game in the modern series over the course of these podcasts, so I have to ask, before we start talking about Galaban again, starting with you, Hilary, is there a non-Oath and Felghana East game that you think you're interested in playing next? Because I mean, both you and Tina expressed some interest in the rest of the series and seemed to be enjoying and enjoyed Oath and Felghana. So is there another East game you think might be your next East game to conquer?
Yeah, definitely. I'm in the process of deciding, actually. If I wanted to go for another game that had a similar play style, I was definitely thinking of Napishtim next, just because it's, as we discussed before, one of the other ones that sort of tied everything in with this overarching story, another one that got redone. So I thought that'd be a good one. If I wanted a different style, I was thinking of 7.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, Napishtim is in the same engine as this game and has a similar vibe and similar pace. The PC version is better than the PS2 version, and
Yes,
7 the PC version is probably also better than the PSP version in this case. It's sort of the first of the new style. Tina, what East games other than Felghana are you interested in trying next?
So I actually really want to play 8 next, just because I really like the scenery and all the dragon designs. But also in this game, I know we got a few little hints of other countries, and I kind of want to discover those for the other games. So I'm not sure what they were even in. Like, there was the guy in the bar came from like Garmin or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, East takes place in a fake version of the world, and each game takes place in basically a different country.
Yeah.
Let's see. Salceda takes place in fake Spain. East 7 takes place in, I think, fake Tunisia or fake Carthage, because it's in North Africa, and it's in this sort of big port town, which I think, and it was in a conflict against the Rom Empire, so I think it's supposed to be Carthage. 5, which is the only one that we don't have an official Western release of, takes place in fake Egypt, and East 8 is either fake Greece or fake island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, whichever you prefer. But and the first 2 East games take place off the coast of fake France, because there's a legend, of an ancient city called Cair East, which was off the coast of Normandy, which is where the East series gets its title from, this lost city of East that's part of European or maybe specifically French legend.
Oh yeah, I remember reading that was sort of the name inspiration, and maybe a little bit of like why it's vaguely fake European, but not much to do with the actual story.
Yeah, and of course, Adol's always clashing with the Rom Empire, which is obviously the Roman Empire, but they're mostly
Oh yeah.
mostly villains in the East series. You meet a couple Romans that are decent folks. There's a Roman commander that's in Salsetta and makes a cameo in 8, who's basically is Adol's ally now. But going through the East games is a bit of a world tour of this world, and I mean, Tina, if you like dragon designs, you might want to play East 7 because that whole game is about like fighting legendary dragons from legendary ruins. And in East 8, they say the word primordials about 12,000 times in that game because it's the only island known that has primordial beasts on it. So a lot of dinosaurs on East 8, which I'm sure didn't escape your notice.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of dragon mythology in East 7, a lot of rampaging dinosaurs in East 8. And also I should mention. 7 is a sort of a normal RPG. You're visiting different parts of the world. You're doing dungeons, and there's very high world stakes that there's very high plot stakes that increase as you play through the game. But both Salsetta and Lacrimosa are focused on exploration a lot. In both of those games, you're sort of trying to explore a space. It's a forest in Memories of Salsetta, and it's an island that you're stranded on in Lacrimosa of Dana. And so they're more non-linear than the other East game than East 7 at least, and there's a big focus on exploring a space and completing a map that is not present in other games in the series, but is a lot of fun. Like I loved filling out my map in Lacrimosa of Dana.
Nice.
Lacrimosa of Dana is the biggest and prettiest East game. It took me over 50 hours, which is 25 hours more than second place, I think.
We didn't get all versions of 4, did we?
Oh no. 4 had 2 versions when it came out, which was one of which was Mask of the Sun, and one of which was Dawn of Ys. But neither of them were made by Falcom. Then one of those got remade for the PS2, but isn't really in line with the other remakes. And then Memories of Salsetta is a Vita game, which I think might have a PC version by now, that incorporates some plot details of Mask of the Sun and Dawn of Ys, and that's the official Ys 4 in the current timeline. So and Dawn of Ys is one of those lawnmower sumo wrestler games where Adol attacks enemies by bumping into them. So if you want to play an old school version of one of those, finding a translation of Dawn of Ys might be better than playing Ys 1 or 2, because those games aren't bad, but they are awfully primitive compared to the rest of the series.
Yeah.
I think I had to go on that Ys tangent because that's it's part of who I am. I just walk up to people and tell them all about Ys. It's just part of my personality. But back to Oath and Felghana. The final area is the island of Genos. You fight Dularn at the beginning, and then Bishop Nicholas near the end, and then the super weapon demon thing, Galaban, at the very end. How about Galaban's boss battle? You are just jumping and dodging and climbing ice pillars the whole time. It's a more involved boss fight than anything else in the game.
Oh, I died a lot.
Yeah, I just couldn't figure out what to do in the beginning, so I watched some videos to help out with that.
I bought the item that gives you an extra life if you die, but only
Yeah,
once.
I got that too.
And it was the only fight in the game that I had that I needed that for, because I think I bought it when I was in the clock tower because I finally had enough gold to do it.
Yeah.
At that point. But the only time I needed it in the entire game was against Galaban, and just because he fills the screen with stuff. There's grids of lasers and fireballs and 2 giant hands smashing down, and I mentioned pillars of ice. There's a lot of fire involved too. He just fills the screen with crap, and you need to be good at dodging, just so he exposes his eye for 5 seconds and you can throw fireballs at it. Yeah, it's a challenging final boss. I didn't have to check a video or anything this time. Again, the muscle memory came back a little bit, and I was able to beat it on the first try out of some miracle. But I did do a tiny bit of grinding. I decided, because when I got to him I was level 48, I'm like, maybe I should get to 50 and see if I can upgrade my weapons a bit. So I threw on a podcast and gained 2 levels, and handled him okay.
Yeah, I definitely ended up. It was. I mean, there were a few points in the game where I said, "Okay, time to level up a little and check my equipment, upgrade, and come back." And I think I gained like 3 levels between my first and second attempt on the final boss.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think the level the level scaling in this game is disgusting. We mentioned in the first episode that just upgrading your equipment or gaining one level does give you a meaningful amount of extra power, because the attack and defense numbers are go up linearly. And I think gaining one level made the difference between the bats dealing 3 damage to me in the final area to dealing 0 damage to me in the final area, which is significant. Yeah, upgrading and leveling is significant in this game, and I don't know if I could have beaten that final boss if I had gone to 49 instead of 50.
Yeah, after the first try, I did a lot of grinding, maxed out all my items. I used a lot of those potions to gain hit points. And then I didn't find it too difficult after that. Actually, I found the third Dulorn more difficult.
Yeah, the final Dulorn was annoying just because she could fill the whole screen with swords.
Yeah.
The way I figured it out was to make sure that the flying swords are targeting me when I'm on the ground, and then double jumping them after they start to move.
Yeah.
But the delay on them was weird, and she could throw them from different angles, and she's invincible for a lot of that. And you have to but it did help that fireballs dealt around 200 damage to her, and sword strikes only did about 50 damage to her. So when I discovered that, it's like, oh, okay, this will help a little bit.
Yeah.
And really, I only used fireballs for specific boss fights because I relied on the wind magic really heavily this whole game.
Oh, me too, yeah.
Especially for flying enemies. I don't know how to hit a flying enemy out of the air because I suck at doing the upswing. So I'm just gonna throw in the wind magic and then sort of jump into them and see what happens.
Yeah, I did the same thing.
Yep.
It worked a lot. It worked pretty well though, especially if you charge up wind magic and it takes up a third of the screen. That's pretty nice. Did you guys have any strategy for regular encounters by the end of the game? Did you favor wind or earth heavily?
I pretty much did the same thing you did. Just cast the wind spell and jump. I think I used the wind spell more than just regular attack by the end of the game.
I would use the wind spell once and then slash around a bunch, and then the wind spell again was my strategy most of the time. But Hilary, did you differ from that at all, or are you just as basic as the two of us?
Only slightly. I mean, once I got the hang of the wind spell, especially for flying enemies, which always really annoyed me, or enemies that change their elevation, that was really, really helpful to just jump and do the wind spell. But I did incorporate some of the fire spells. If an enemy had a lot of hit points, I would try and hit it with fire a little bit before I got close enough to sword strike. That's the only real difference. So,
at the end of the game, Chester makes a noble sacrifice, but is still kind of a dick about it because he punches his sister in the stomach. But Adol and Dogi and Elena escape with their lives. And then peace returns to Felghana. But speaking of peace returning to Felghana, we didn't really talk about Redmont very much in the first episode, the town that Adol keeps returning to in this game. And again, this is a one-town RPG, and I don't love one-town RPGs a lot of the time, but at least Redmont's pleasant. And if you visit Redmont in between major story segments and dungeons, you can be rewarded with some side quests, like the guy who desperately needs Revolor and will give you a lot of money early in the game if you give him a bunch. That's how I was able to afford the Bandit Slayer was that side quest. You collecting some herbs for some sick Picards that give you one of those potions that increases your HP.
Yeah, that's in the mountain area. The poor little guys get sick, and you have to go collecting these herbal leaves.
And I had forgotten all about this before replaying it this time. But the lady whose son was presumed dead, and who gives you the amulet that lights up the mine, you find the missing kid. He was in the dungeon for some indeterminate amount of time. And you can see a little cute reunion with him and his either his mother or grandmother. Yeah, I think it was his grandmother.
It is his grandmother because his parents. I think part of what made it part of the reason she wouldn't talk to you and was so traumatized is because she lost her child and her grandchild in the mine.
Mm-hmm. But it's sweet like Bob. Who's Bob? Oh, he's the missing guy with the grandma in town.
Bob's alive.
Yeah, that was a sweit little moment.
It was.
But yeah, Redmond's a very, very sort of cute, idyllic RPG town. That's and it's sort of very pretty looking, especially with especially, and like I don't know, like it's weirdly wholesome. Like everyone is just so pleasant and helpful, and maybe the most pleasant and helpful of all of them was Sister Nell, which made her turn as Dularan even all the more surprising.
Yeah,
But
I have to admit, at first I was like, "Oh, everything's so wholesome, including the church. It's nice that the clergy are actually helpful and like on your side." Yep.
Whoops.
Yeah, at first when she was missing at one point, I thought that Nicholas probably kidnapped her.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that the turn of Nicholas being evil was way less surprising than Nell being evil.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe because he was, he was part of the castle. He just has more of a traditional villain look to him than the sweet nun that's been looking after the kids.
Right.
So yeah, I was a little thrown by that. But did you guys have a favorite NPC town person or a favorite little bit about Redmond? Because it is a nice little RPG town, isn't it?
So I actually like that, the Count's kids just like acting like normal little kids and playing with the other kids in the town.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And did either of you do the side quest where you had to escort the boy back to the castle?
No, I think I missed that.
I mentioned it in the previous episode.
I went back.
Oh, okay, yeah. There is a side quest where you meet the wife and kids. But you have to do it before you get the statue in the mine.
Oh.
Yes.
The abandoned mine, not the quarry. So like after the zone of lava, but before the abandoned mine. And it's you get an item from it that's pretty helpful, and you get to meet the count's wife and kids before Valestine Castle. But it is cute to know that like, this rich asshole at least has a nice family, and they're not trying to make the family also rich assholes.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorites was probably the little girl. I think her name was Anya.
Oh, is she the one that makes you play Find the Revolver?
Yes, she is. That was great. I walked into town and her dad was like, a bunch of ore went missing from my house. I have no idea. I think my daughter took it. I don't know what she would do with it. And it turns out she wanted to play pirates.
Yep, but hey, now Adol has some more, and I'm in favor of that.
Yeah. She also does a pirate voice, and it's really cute.
But yeah, Redmond's a nice RPG town, and this is a nice RPG with nice dungeons and plot and everything. But it ends the way many East games do, with Adol fading off into the distance, seeking more adventures with some poor lovelorn lady left behind. Seriously, it happens in every single East game, just about. I can't think of an exception.
And Dogi decides to stay in his hometown for a while too.
Yeah, that's a little surprising because normally Dogi's joining Adol as they walk off into the distance. But I think this is Falcom deliberately subverting that a little bit and explaining why Dogi's not in East 4. I think, but I thought East 4 was supposed to take place before East 3. I'm not sure. The timelines look confusing. I'd have to do some wiki research before I could say exactly that for sure. But again, this is a really short RPG. I think I mentioned I thought it was 12 to 15 hours in the first episode. I finished it in just under 10.
Wow.
So, like, this is an RPG you could beat in a weekend, if you decide to have a weekend very indoors. But I think that there's real satisfaction and substance here for a 10-hour RPG. Like, I don't know if I don't want to complain exactly, but I would sort of prefer that East games were closer to the 10 and 20 hour range than the 50-hour Lacrimosa of Dana range, because I think there's real value in an RPG that doesn't waste your time. And I feel like that Oath and Felghana didn't waste any of my time. Oh, you level up to level 50 in 10 hours and beat some challenging final bosses, and the ending is cute. Like,
yeah.
That's great. I don't need to play a 100-hour RPG every time I put a new game into my PS4. This is brevity is the soul of wit, and this game is short but very, very sweet. I really like Oath and Felghana, and because it's a sort of typical East game in a lot of ways, I think it's a really good choice for like first East game you play, first East game on Retro Encounter. I think it was an ideal choice.
Yeah, me too. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a nice contained chapter with a fun setting, fun gameplay, and it doesn't take forever. So I do think there's value there.
Yeah, I really like shorter games myself. It's good for busy people.
Yeah, I am not a teenager with all the time in the world anymore.
Yeah.
I'm an adult who works 40 hours a week and has a house to maintain and some semblance of a social life. So I don't have the time I had for long RPGs in the past. So the end result of that is I really value short, dense game experiences. And I also play handheld RPGs probably 3 times more than console RPGs. Like, I play my Switch in handheld mode 90% of the time because I can do it around the house or take it on the train or play it on breaks at work. So yeah, Ys Oath and Felghana is a short game, and that really jumped out at me, and it made me want more short games like this.
Yeah, like it's not too padded out with 100 pointless little side quests. I like that.
Yeah, I think that early on they say that, hey, there's 4 statues and they could have world-shaping implications, and then you find 4 statues, you find out what's going on with the world, and then you go through some final dungeons and some big plot twists.
Yep.
There's little wasted space in Oath and Felghana, and that felt great. But okay, I think we're near the end of our discussion here. But we've talked about Ys the Oath and Felghana. We've talked about every other Ys game. We've talked about the Ys fighting game for PSP that I'm still mildly obsessed with 10 years later. Or 10 years after it came out, I should say. And, like Falcom games have such colorful characters and good writing and appealing settings. I think we probably don't do enough Falcom on this podcast. Maybe even later this year we'll do another Falcom game, but I'm still in the planning stages for everything beyond the next couple months. But listeners, thank you so much for joining us on our Ys the Oath and Felghana journey that went a little all over the place, but stayed mostly in Felghana. And thank you, Hilary, and thank you, Tina, for playing this game with me. I had a lot of fun replaying it. This was a game I loved at the time, and respect maybe even a little more after a second round.
It was a nice little picture of Dogi's hometown, and I could honestly seeing it probably, even if I play more Ys games, being a favorite.
Yeah, it's either this or 7 is my favorite, I think. 7 has a more involved story and more characters, and I really, really liked the setting and characters, but the action was very competent. Again, it felt like hipster Secret of Mana. 7 and Felghana have sort of different shapes and tones, and Felghana is sort of my favorite of the solo Adol games, and 7 is my favorite of the party Adol games. And I don't want to choose a favorite between those two, but Felghana is safely in my tie for first place as among the Ys series. And again, I mentioned this just seconds ago, but I think it's a good starting point for the series for a series newcomer as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to see more of this world.
Yeah, and really, there isn't a loser among any of them. If I had to pick a least favorite, it's probably the first Ys game, because there's some design elements that do not hold up in 2019. I'm thinking of 2 boss battles very, very specifically. But I recommend the whole series, and even if you play all of them besides the first 2, the first one's only like 3.5 hours long. Maybe it's worth it as a history lesson, or as a let's play in just a few sittings. But okay, if we get into streaming and let's play talk now, the episode's really over. I've already thanked the listeners, but listeners, if you want to hear more from us in RPG Fan, you can always visit rpgfan.com. We have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch streaming, a Discord channel, online forums. We have a lot of ways you can interact with us and see what we're doing. We also have articles and reviews that go up almost every day of the week. Tina, you even have a bi-weekly series on
bi-weekly.
Yeah, on Kickstarted or indie RPG games that are still in the planning and campaigning stage, called Crowdfunding Chronicles, and it's because I'm not on Kickstarter checking out stuff on my own every week. I've been relying on Crowdfunding Chronicles to see if I want to spend any early dollars, at least the past couple months.
There's so much interesting stuff coming out.
Yeah.
I think the Kickstarter boom has died down a little bit from its most intense days of like the 2 years after Broken Age happened, but it's still a big source of and a source of creativity in the game space, and maybe there's even more board game and pen and paper RPG stuff in Kickstarter than video games nowadays.
Thinking about that. Yeah, like tabletop seems to be really, really big on Kickstarter.
Yeah, I think that a lot of their biggest campaigns of all time have been tabletop games, but I did not do the research ahead of time, so I won't dwell on it very longer. So yeah, please check out Crowdfunding Chronicles and our reviews and music reviews on RPGFan.com. We also have 2 other fine podcasts: Random Encounter starring Greg Delmage and Rhythm Encounter starring a variety of people over the years. Rhythm Encounter is currently on hiatus, but there are plans to bring it back, possibly even later this year. And we also have many previous Retro Encounter episodes, 183 of them in fact, and but only 4 of them, maybe 5, are about Falcom games. So if you're looking for a Falcom-centered podcast, I apologize. We aren't quite there yet. But listeners, if you want to give us feedback or comment on the podcast, the best way to do so is email retro@rpgfan.com, and you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram and all those other places that I mentioned before. But individually, what's the best way to reach us? Let's have us tell you, starting with Tina.
Kittensoft39 on Twitter and Instagram. The same on Tumblr, but I hardly use it. It's like no one uses Tumblr anymore.
R.I.P. Tumblr. And Hilary, how can listeners reach you?
Hilary relates that the best way to reach her is as EP Fire on the RPG Fan Discord. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Okay, all right. Hilary evidently has become a silent protagonist, and we're now receiving her communications via third-person voiceover. That's interesting. But I'm still in the first person, so you can find me, Mike Sollosi, on Twitter at The Real Monsoon most of the time, at Evoker for Dogs other times. I am also Monsoon Mike on the RPG Fan Discord. So that was our little trip to Felghana. It's time to go and sail off into the horizon and hopefully not get shipwrecked on some other podcast. Listeners, thank you. Good night and good luck.